And welcome to Thrift Shop Biography. This is the one about Roseanne Barr. Thank you for listening. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Well, I'm pretty excited to talk to you about this book.
Are you excited?
I really need to talk about this.
Yeah. The book this week is Roseanne, as in Roseanne Barr. It's called My Life as a Woman. And it's her autobiography, which she wrote herself without a ghostwriter, right?
Yeah, you can tell.
But she very much wants to be a writer. It was kind of touch and go whether she would be a writer or a stand-up.
Yeah.
I'm so troubled and angry with Roseanne.
Are you?
Yeah.
What, by the person she turned into? Or if you just read this book, would it bother you?
Like you, I thought I would be excited to talk about it, and I'm not.
Oh, is that because you told me only last night she's put
It's
out
not
a
just that.
tweet.
Look, all right, let me, full disclosure.
Yes.
I am and have been a massive, massive fan of Roseanne Barr. I love the voice that she has in stand-up and on TV. You know, I don't know how long ago it was now, about 8 years, she did this tweet that was generally perceived to be racist, and it kind of is.
And she got taken off her programme.
Her own reboot of Roseanne. Yeah, well, she just got cancelled left, right and centre. Yeah. And I kind of disagree with cancel culture, and I thought she really took the brunt of it because of her voice, because she's a woman, because it was very convenient to have her stamped out.
Right.
Also, she was pro-Trump. I mean, she still is. Do you know what I mean? So it's that thing where I absolutely love her and adore her and her work, but I'm so at odds with the person she's become.
She's got problematic. Yeah, she's become someone who's completely different from the person she is when she writes this book.
Oh my God, the person in this book is a goddess.
Yeah. Okay, this book was published in 1989.
Yeah, weirdly, it's just as Roseanne the programme is taking off, because she doesn't mention it in this book.
No, she basically writes right up to the point where she takes off and writes nothing about being famous apart from that her life's better and she's richer now. That's really all she says.
But as we know, because we've read a lot of these books now, it's often the interesting part of the book.
It is.
Up until they become famous. Sorry, I've just said how I felt about Roseanne.
Yeah.
I've not asked you, so how do you feel about Roseanne?
Actually, I do have an opinion. I didn't think I watched the programme. But when I've watched clips on YouTube this week, I realise I did, because I knew every single person in it really well. Yeah. But I actually thought she was quite a loud, brash, American, probably quite annoying person.
Well, she is.
But she isn't. There's so much to it. And I get it now. I get her worth. For that time, I totally get her worth.
When that sitcom came out, because I loved The Cosby Show, I loved The Golden Girls, I loved all the American import comedies that we got over here in the UK. I loved them, but they were all kind of middle class. And then Roseanne come out, and they were just this real roughy, tufty little working class family. Yeah. And I loved that.
Yeah, that's it. She says that there was nobody who was poor, because it's the 80s, on telly, but they made sure that they were never perceived as stupid. Mm-hmm. That's really important.
Whatever you say about Roseanne Barr, the one thing is she isn't. She's a lot of things, but she is not stupid.
No.
I didn't realise, like I said, being a massive fan of her, I didn't realise how grassroots, hardcore feminist she had been. Even though obviously she was a woman in a man's world, I didn't know that began in a tiny feminist group we should get on with
I didn't know anything about her, so let's talk about her. Okay, go.
So Roseanne Barr was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, which is very Mormon-y.
It's a total Mormon state.
But they're Jewish.
Yeah, they're Jews in the Mormon state.
Yeah, and she's quite often the only Jew in the classroom, in social situations. Yeah. So she's very aware of being the outsider.
Yeah.
But also she has learnt through her grandmother as a Lithuanian Jew. Her other grandparents were killed in the Holocaust. All of that history that she's learning at home, she kind of learns that she's not just different, but also that she comes from a place that people don't like.
Yeah, she's from a persecuted people.
Yeah.
And she says everybody used to sit around talking about the war all the time. I mean, she was born in 1952, 7 years after the war ended. And so all she's heard as a little kid is talk about the war, especially as they're literally that close to it that most of her relatives were wiped out. There's just a few that survived that managed to escape to America via many different journeys. Massive topic of conversation. She says because she was so small, she didn't really understand that it's something that happened far away. She thought it was just down the street. And she constantly had this feeling of fear and that the Nazis were about to come and take her family away with it. And that stayed with her all of her childhood. You can understand that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. When you're a kid, you don't have a concept of distance or time. Don't. And so, no, I get very much how that little girl hearing those stories, which is recent history to those adults anyway.
Yeah, it really is.
But I get how she might think that the Nazis might just come and get her and her family and wipe them out at any time.
Yeah. She's just always afraid, therefore. And they're the only Jews. Well, they live in an apartment building full of Holocaust survivors, a couple of Auschwitz survivors. So she really is surrounded by those stories. But outside that apartment, there aren't any more. So you're isolated and feeling like you're being persecuted. Which apparently she is. She talks tons about being really bullied about being a Jew or being told don't tell anyone because they'll hate you. There's tons of that in this book.
So she's the oldest and she ends up having a younger brother and 2 younger sisters, right? Living with mum and dad. And they are working class. Mum's a cashier at a hamburger drive-in, right?
Yeah.
And I think dad ends up working 2 jobs. One's in Hollywood video. And I think he might work in a fast food place or something.
Yeah.
They're not big earners, professional people, are they?
No, and what it paints in this book is this real picture of a certain period of America, of a certain working class family in America.
But she always wanted to be a writer when she was a little girl. And all she would be told, because she is a girl, is what you need to do is to get a husband.
Yeah.
That's kind of the society that she's growing up in. But she actually says the world lost 2 very good writers when it forced marriage and a mortgage upon my mum and my dad. So her mum and dad are creative. And she does talk about that when they would have people round to the house, dad was a storyteller and the kids would get excited to hear dad's stories. And mum would also be part of it, setting up, say, all right, everybody listen to dad's story. And she'd go, oh, what happened next? Oh, wait till you hear this bit. But they basically said to her that she couldn't be a writer. See, as I was reading it, I thought she contradicted herself quite soon because they actually she said they would encourage her in telling stories and writing, but then they would say to her, it's impossible to be a writer.
Yeah, that storytelling is just within your community, isn't it? Because the mum would hold court to all the neighbours, and they go, oh, tell that one, it's the thing. But that doesn't mean it's your job. Your job is to raise children. You can still have a personality, though, within limits. But it's a massively patriarchy society in their little family world.
Salt Lake City.
Well, it probably is in Mormons as well.
Yeah, of course, yeah. What happens is that so her mum and dad both work, and Roseanne ends up with this nanny who is this big old Tennessee hillbilly called Robbie. Yeah. And she's like chews tobacco and she's very, well, I guess the word butch, is it right? Because she's really
that's about
tall.
Right. Appalachian hillbilly.
It's an odd thing to think of somebody like that would be a nanny looking after young children. Yeah, it is
actually. She wears dungarees and listens to Elvis. She's tobacco.
Yeah, and she says she would just take Roseanne to her house and put her Elvis records on.
Yeah.
But Roseanne adored her to the point that when the other kids, the older kids, would make fun of Robbie, saying, oh, she's a bit butch, she's a bit like a man, little 3-year-old Roseanne would stand up to them and yell at them, leave her alone. And then Roseanne actually says, so she also has this Lithuanian Jewish grandmother who actually came over and run an apartment building.
Yeah,
there.
So within this patriarchal society is a Jewish matriarch who is absolutely all dominating. So it's a little bit contradictory there, isn't it?
Yeah. But Roseanne says that when she became Roseanne as we know her, she realises now it's probably based upon the Jewish matriarch of her grandmother running the tenement slum, I think she calls it. Yeah. And this nanny she used to have, the Tennessee hillbilly. And actually, when you think of Roseanne, she is equal parts Jewish matriarch and Tennessee hillbilly.
That's right.
Who she is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was very interested to read that.
Yes. Those were her character inspirations.
Now, also, reading between the lines at the beginning, they kind of have a chaotic house, the mum and the dad and the young children. Yeah. And they would visit the grandmother. Now, she kind of doesn't say explicitly at the beginning that her dad was angry and had a temper.
No, she doesn't.
But she tells this bit about where her little brother is bouncing. They're over their grandmother's house, and the little brother is bouncing a ball, which is becoming very annoying. And the dad tells the little boy to stop bouncing the ball, but he doesn't. Anyway, it escalates to the point where her dad goes over, hits a little boy on the head, and the grandmother gets up, slaps the dad across the face and says, "Don't ever hit my grandchildren again." But then Roseanne says it's the first time anybody stuck up for us with our father.
Right.
So that's the first time anybody stuck up for you. Then this is happening a lot.
She only drops in the odd thing like that. And she says at some point that she really wanted to stay out because home was a place of fear, or she says a couple of sentences like that, and she says no more. And
then when we'll get to it, but when she leaves home, she actually leaves this massive thing, which is for you to make up your. In fact, I think she says this is up for you readers to make up your own mind. But this is why I left home. So
what does she say?
She says, I'll say it when we get there.
Oh, okay.
We'll get there quite soon. Yeah. Hang on. But she also says that her parents actually were in love.
Yeah.
And it would be very obvious to the kids how much in love they were.
It sounds happy, doesn't it?
It does sound happy.
But there's more to it.
Yeah, because she drops in little bits telling us that Dad used to hit them. And Granny stuck up for the first time. So there's other stuff going on under the surface.
Apart from we all know that's really basic parenting in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, it's the truth.
So it's weird.
You know, even as a kid, she did resist stereotypically feminine stereotypes. Like talking about Barbie when all the kids would play Barbie. She was like, oh no, let's dress her up as a resistance fighter. Yeah. She can parachute in and kill the Nazis. Yeah. And even when she had to take, because she's a girl, she has to take home ec classes in school to learn how to look after her husband. She was so resistant to all that. It's not when she became a teenager and found a woman's group that she became. She was that little girl. Right. Absolutely was. And I think that probably came from then her grandmother, who run this tenement slum by herself. And she said she remembers she'd visit her grandmother and sometimes people would come trying to bang the door down and stuff. And her grandmother had just a tiny little rusty hook that would keep the door shut. It's not like her gran was behind 10 locks keeping the people. She was a fierce woman.
Yeah, she was really tough. So she's seeing the contradictions because she's been told, you're a woman, you're worth nothing, you can't have a job, you'll only get married and have kids. And then she's seeing this woman who runs this massive business on her own and beats people off with a stick. And goes, hey, how come you're telling me I can't? I can see an example of someone who can.
Yeah.
And a nanny who can.
Yeah. Also, some of her earlier memories of her mum is if there was a knock at the door, the mum would gather up the children. They'd hide in the basement for about 2 hours until her mum thought it was safe to come back out. So at the same time, she has this fierce grandmother and this big butch nanny, but she actually has a mum who seems quite timid and scared.
Skipped a generation.
But maybe that's necessary so you can see the contrast and think, I don't want to be like my mum.
Yeah, you've got choices. I'll pick her. I don't want to be her.
Yeah, I don't want to be hiding in the basement.
Yeah.
I want to be beating people off with a stick.
Yes. That was her mum's mum, but her dad's mum, Grandpa Joe, he was the only one not slaughtered from his whole family. And he left Kiev when he was 9 years old and he was a shoe mender. That's the only skill he got at the age 9. So he walked across Europe, aged 9, mending shoes, all the way to France from Kiev, then managed to get a passage to South Africa where he found a Jewish community. And at 17, he travelled with some of the Jewish community through Ellis Island and into New York City. It's astounding. And then he made his way to Minnesota and met Grandma and had her dad. And that's the history of them. You know, that's how much they were survivors.
And I tell you how much of that has actually travelled down to young Roseanne. She says the first time she went to New York City, her and her sister went on a little ferry trip. And she said when they came back and saw the Statue of Liberty, she just involuntarily started sobbing. Because she says that's the first thing that my granddad and my other older relatives would have seen, and just the hope and the relief and everything that it gave them. That had a real profound effect on Roseanne.
Yeah. Make you a fighter. If people have gone to that length to survive, you're not just going to throw it away, are you? Well, you might, but it's obviously really sunk into her.
So comedy, Roseanne's dad loved comedy, and on the Ed Sullivan Show, he would quite often have comedian guests. And when they come on, he would call the kids to the television set and they'd sit down as a family and really enjoy the comedy sketches. So this is ingrained in Roseanne from an early age. But also her dad would kind of talk through it. And if the comedy wasn't hitting, her dad would explain to Roseanne why it wasn't so good this week. Or if it was a really good one, obviously he would say, oh, this is why it's good.
Yeah, she was getting a class of comedy every week, wasn't she?
Yeah, definitely. But he also said to her, comedy is best when you speak up for the little man and you are killing sacred cows. I guess is punching up, right?
Yeah.
Later on, like much later, when Roseanne is a hugely successful comic and her mum and dad go to watch her.
Interviewed. She's being interviewed.
Is she
for
being
magazine?
interviewed?
Yeah.
Yes. And then the mum chimes in and says, oh, you don't know what your dad's thesis was about at college. And mum makes dad tell Roseanne what his thesis was. And it was how he wanted to be a stand-up comedian.
Yeah, that's the first time she knew that.
Yeah.
And then she said they just exchanged this look where Roseanne was saying to her dad, I know that you made me a comedian, but actually you made me a great comedian.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool. Giving him credit in that moment.
Yeah.
He totally trained her up in comedy.
Yeah.
Which eventually gave her a voice for all her other issues.
Yeah.
I've got to say this, I Googled her to back up this book because it ends in 1989 and I thought, I don't know enough. I don't feel I know enough about her from this book. She hadn't lived half of it then. And years after this book was published, she declared that she was abused. I don't think we can almost say any of this without throwing that in, because otherwise why are we so confused that she hasn't mentioned disharmony?
Right.
'Cause it doesn't come up in this book. It's not in this book.
It is in this book, but she doesn't say it. No,
there's a time when you think she infers it.
Definitely.
Oh, right. Okay, carry on then.
Okay. She does jump about in this book a bit. When she leaves home, so when she's, an older teenager, she leaves home on the bus and she says she can vividly remember the bus pulling her way and her younger sister Geraldine is looking at her and crying. And Roseanne says she can remember crying, looking at her little sister. Oh. And she says, so Geraldine is 14 when Roseanne leaves home. And Roseanne says she cries and she does not talk to me again until she is 22. So that's 8 years,
because she's so gutted at the betrayal of being left with her parents.
Yeah, well, then you kind of think, why? Because Roseanne's not told us anything at this point. And then she says, at the age of 22, once she has worked out her feelings of hatred and abandonment towards me. And then Roseanne writes in the book, so, dear reader, what would be so hideous and horrible that it would take my sister 8 years to forgive me?
Oh, that's what she's trying to say.
She's trying to... Well, because I know that Roseanne had interviews in the past with Oprah where she says that her dad sexually abused her. That's what I took that to mean.
Because when I read that, I didn't know that. Only at the very end of the book did I Google her life to get the broader picture beyond 1989, and at that point I read that she'd said that her dad abused her, although her sisters and brother completely deny it.
Her sister wrote a book called My Sister Roseanne where she absolutely refutes Roseanne's allegations that her dad sexually abused them. And the mum and dad were like, we can't believe she said this because it's not true.
I don't know what to believe.
Well, in this book she doesn't actually say anything.
No, but she does say when later on when she's moved to Colorado and she gets her sisters to come, and she said it was less important to get the brother to come because he's a male, and he's safer.
Yeah,
I needed to get the women out of my family home or whatever.
Yeah, that's
true. That's the only other thing she says. But of course, if you're reading it not knowing any of that, there's no real clues that her parents are problems. So I didn't know what she meant.
This is so complicated because Roseanne is such a complicated woman.
Yeah.
And obviously it's a complicated subject just because she's not admitting to sexual abuse in the first instance. That's totally understandable. To then come out and say, my dad abused me, it's not a straightforward thing to do. But then a couple years later, she retracted it herself.
What?
Yeah, and she said it was the medication I was on. I was having a breakdown or something. And then later, again, she said, I didn't retract those allegations. I just said I used the wrong word because I said it was incest and it wasn't. So we're at a situation now when like people just don't know what's going on.
She repeatedly claims in this book that she's insane. To do with her head injury. She takes her sweet time telling us about this accident where she was flung in the air, landed on the car bonnet, the car ornament, it went into her skull, so she got brain damage. And that, she said, there was a before and after of her. She was sane before and insane afterwards.
Yeah, but she also says that her mum would always say, oh, Roseanne was fine until she was hit by the car. Was she really?
Was she fine? That is definitely what I thought. I did wonder. There's a lot of madness in her life. For example, when she was 3, I think she was 3, her face seized up. It's like she had a stroke.
Palsy,
yeah, but they didn't know what it was. And her mother panicked, and of course, instead of the doctor, she calls the rabbi. So the rabbi comes over and does all these prayers, and she doesn't change. So the next day, she thought she'll try the Mormon priest, and it fixed her. So then she thought the Mormon God is the one that works. But to cover her back, we'll stay Jewish and Mormon. So then she says something like, Friday, Saturday, Sunday morning, I was Jewish. Sunday evening, Tuesday and Wednesday, I was Mormon. And they actually really did go to the Mormon churches and the Jewish churches. And by the time she was 10, she was travelling around the youth Mormon groups as the main speaker because she really believed in all of this religious stuff. And so she was preaching. And all the Mormons were saying, it's amazing that our God even loves a Jewish person. This Jewish person must be special that she's loved by our God. So she had 2 different gods on her side, but it actually taught her to speak. It taught her the confidence to stand up and speak, which she called on later. Yeah, it turned out to be Bell's palsy. She said she was 16 when she was reading this book, and it described Bell's palsy, which is a temporary sort of stroke.
Yes, it's just coincidence.
She was
happened
like,
when the Mormon
what?
priest
If they did Mormon first.
Yeah.
Jewish. She went, I wasted 10 years of my life believing in this Mormon miracle. Yeah, so her life wasn't normal in any way really before she got hit by a car.
She was 16 when she got hit by a car, right? And also, what she doesn't say in this book, okay, she talks about having to go and live in an institution because her behaviour did change and she became hard to manage at home. So they put her away, but she was allowed out at weekends. Oh my God, every other weekend. I love it when she comes home for the weekend and she gets stoned.
It makes you feel insane just reading it, doesn't it? It's like being trapped in hell.
I know, because if you've ever been stoned and been in an awkward situation,
you can't sober up.
This was like the worst thing, where she was smoking pot with this guy and then she just had the urge to go home.
Well, no, he also said that he wants to have sex with her, and then he just does, and she's never even done that before. She doesn't even really know what she's doing, and and that's all just that's so messy and horrible. I don't like reading that. There's a lot of times in this book actually where it's uncomfortable reading because it's just kind of horrific. Even when she goes to the motel, when she's moved to Colorado and she's hanging out in this motel, they're all getting stoned and the bikes are trying to sleep with her, and I don't feel she's in control, and it worries me. Like a parent would worry. It worries me that she's not looking after herself, she's not safe, no one's protecting her properly, and she can't look after herself because she's not sane enough. And another thing around that time, she's only 19 when she's moved to Colorado and does seem really out of control. She's really excited there's all these men and she can talk to men and maybe sleep with the men. And I read on Wikipedia that she got pregnant at 18 and had the child adopted.
Well,
so you have to factor that into this.
In this book, she does talk about giving birth, and I just naturally assumed that was a child that became her child that grew up with her. But then I read, after reading this book, that she had a child at that age and gave it up for adoption.
Yeah. So it's a bit weird to try and slot in where that happened. Is it around the time when she's in hospital? It's around that mad time. Yeah. It could have even been that one night stand.
Do you know what? Then that's why she gave that kid up for adoption, is because she didn't feel like she could look after it at that young age. I don't
think she could, possibly. She wasn't sane.
Yeah.
I was just worried about her, to be honest.
Yeah. No, I get it. But I mean, when you were 16, you were travelling abroad on your own? I think when 17. You're 16, you don't care. 17. Yeah. Wow. That's quite You're so much more grown up. No, but I think just thinking from Roseanne's point of view, when she's a late teenager moving to Colorado and stuff, you don't think of it in the same. When you're an older adult, of course, you worry about younger people, but when you have the time of your life.
Yeah, and actually, she did say that was the happiest time, though, just listening to Joni Mitchell, smoking, telling jokes. And she said male and female were equal and people hanging out. And the first time she went to that motel where she met her boyfriend, who became her husband,
Bill.
Yeah, he went out into the kitchen and brought her some food, and she said, nothing in my life had prepared me for a man bringing me, a woman, food. She'd never, ever experienced that before. Mm-hmm. She didn't know it was possible. So just men and women being equal blew her mind.
I think it's the end of the 60s. Is this about 1970, isn't it, at this point? And she's moved out of Utah and her patriarchal, constructed Jewish Mormon life. And she's hitched across to Colorado and she's hanging out with people her own age. They work in motels and hamburger joints. They smoke spliffs and listen to Joni Mitchell. Yeah, she's in a completely different environment. Yeah, and it's a real surprise to her.
But it's weird. With the knowledge we now have, we know that she's just been through a whole pregnancy, given birth and given a child away, and then had this experience.
Right,
That's epic.
Yeah.
It's an epic thing to miss out.
I wonder if at that point, because this book was coming out at the first flush of success.
I don't think she could have told anyone.
Yeah, which is why she hasn't put it in this book.
I get that. But it's just such a weird thing to miss out of how she was feeling. Mm-hmm. It makes a bit of sense how she was so clingy to this bloke, Bill. Mm-hmm. She said it was like weeks where she didn't even get dressed. She just sat in bed sheets waiting for him to come home. Just bloody hell. And he didn't even want a relationship. He just had a really bad acid trip in California or something. I'm going to move to Colorado and just try and calm down. He didn't want anything to happen to him. And she happened to him.
Yes.
Wouldn't let go.
But she had a good couple of years of just like freedom, of like hitching around and working in diners and stuff. So she's having a normal life, really, away from home for the first time.
Yeah, she is,
Yeah. But then with Bill, it kind of jumps a bit. But they end up getting married and they start a family, don't they? And she
misses that out, really.
Yeah, she does.
It kind of... The next chapter is describing having 3 children. Yeah. I mean, it literally leaps to that and being stuck as a housewife.
She's a housewife and a mother, but she still obviously has this creative need that she needs to express. And there's a local radio show by Alan Berg, who takes phone-in callers, and she starts phoning him in. And he's very Jewish, and he talks up for the little guy and stuff. And so Roseanne starts phoning in, and she comes across really well. And then a couple of days later, she phones in again, and she's enjoying getting this stuff off of her chest in a funny way. Well, like you said, was speaking in the Mormon church at the age of 10. So she does have this need to talk. And now she's doing it via the radio phone. And I Googled Alan Berg, by the way, because she does say in this book that because he was such an outspoken person of like the Jewish community, that he was just walking to his car one day at the age of 50 and literally got assassinated.
Yeah. Shocking. It just doesn't feel like my experience in Britain. It feels like more crazy American Wild Wild West madness somehow.
And that's only because we don't have guns.
Oh, is that why?
No, it is. What do you
we
think
have
about
Aryan Brotherhoods and Ku Klux Klan?
Yeah, we do. They're just
we
like
have white supremacists,
hooligans.
I suppose we would call them.
Yeah, of course, we have the Gammons. And
Nazis.
Yeah, we
have
do.
anti-Jewish stuff? Do we have?
Yeah, there's anti-Semitism.
It's just hatred with slightly different labels.
We definitely have it, and I think we just don't have as many guns. I think that's why people don't get shot.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
But people are the same wherever you go.
You've just got a little bit more of a chance of surviving a beating than you do.
What's shocking, what I hate, is that guy got assassinated because of things that he said.
Yeah.
He's not out being physically violent, getting a taste of his own medicine.
No.
And he's actually sticking up for people as well.
Yeah, right.
And then these flipping white supremacists.
But she really cites that as the person that gave her the kick start to be more than just a mother, that she's got a voice, she's got things to say that people might want to hear. She never got a chance to thank him. So she then found this woman writer's bookshop. Woman to Woman, it's called. And it was a safe place with equal rights, dignity, self-respect.
This is the beginning of the 1980s, so really she does do a 10-year jump. She talks a lot about being with Bill in Colorado at the beginning of the 1970s and hating John Denver. Yeah. And then it does. Then all of a sudden it's the beginning of the 1980s and she's got
married and had 3 kids. We don't want to hear about it, so thanks for leaving that out. Don't need to hear that.
Yeah, and she finds this feminist bookstore.
Describes that in quite a lot of detail.
Well, then she discovers they have a meeting in the basement. Yeah. In fact, she's just in there looking at the books, and then she sees that there's steps downstairs, and she says to somebody, what's downstairs? They said, every Tuesday there's a meeting. She said, all of a sudden she felt electric, like, oh my God, there are other people who feel like me. And she went and she said there were women of colour. She walked in the middle of a conversation where a woman of colour was saying, well, you need to address your racism. Yeah. And Roseanne is like, oh, brilliant. So it's not just about feminism, actually. Yes. It's about
issues.
Yeah. And then she said there was another black woman in there who said to the first black woman, oh, no, now you're being divisive.
Right.
So it's like they were really having intelligent discussions about society and the patriarchy and how women relate to each other and men relate to each other. And Roseanne just went in there and just felt at home immediately. And that really, along with Alan Berg and the phone-in show, things begin to happen. Yeah. But when you read this, it does sound like she's going to be a writer at this point. Yeah. It sounds like she's going to be the next Erica Jong or Jermaine Greer. You don't imagine this is the beginning of a stand-up career.
No, and what you realise with that book is that's her piece of feminist writing. That's the book she always wished she could write. It is a piece of feminist writing.
This book is called My Life as a Woman.
Exactly.
It's not called My Life as a Stand-up Comedian.
No. She's chatting to some hippie saying the 60s are dead. The 60s was all about free love and all that sort of vibes. It's all a community. And she reckoned that feminism was born out of that. Because it's all free love. It's all very well as long as you're equal. And if you're not equal, you need to then work out how to get equal in order to have free love and everyone be cool together. So the men sort of dropped away and the women were the ones who took it on to the next place, which is feminism. Makes sense.
But what's interesting as well is that when in the 80s, when feminism was becoming populist, actually that wasn't the type of feminism that Roseanne was up for, or indeed like these women of colour at the bookstore were up for. So they began subverting populist feminism and they would disrupt feminist meetings because it was all, I guess, quite white and middle class. I only began learning about intersectionalized feminism, I don't know, about 7 or 8 years ago. It blew my mind at the time. You just think feminism is for all women, but actually popular feminism is just for a certain type of woman, actually. Really? Right. And Roseanne and the black woman were like, well, what about black women? What about working class women? What about Jewish women? Yeah. And so what
about prostitutes or people with mental illness? Or they started to really embrace all of it, didn't they?
Yeah.
In the neighbourhood as well and bring everyone in.
Yeah. So she was really kicking up the stink where she could.
Yeah. She said that she was dying in her mind and in her soul from self-hate.
Damn it, I hate
that. She's just a housewife at home. She's got no voice, no reason to live. And this was giving her a reason. Yeah, here's the bit where she says, then my sisters phoned me from Salt Lake City. They were locked in their rooms from fear of violence.
And so she said, come and live with me.
Yeah. And so we started telling the truth and we began to heal.
Well, then that tells me, knowing what we know now, that there was sexual abuse at home.
Or violent abuse, or violence beyond the odd smack of the head.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't know, but there was trouble. Anyway, so she had this part-time job in a bar where it was all men in the bar and they were all constant sexual comments, derogatory comments. And one day she just snaps and talks back to them and goes, like, don't call me honey, you fucking pig. And then laughs, thinking she'll get fired. And they laugh. They think it's hilarious. So she thinks, oh, I'll say it again then. So she says something else really rude and they love it. So they end up going there all the time just for her to talk back at them.
I think she said that the guy, I can't remember what this bar was called, but she said it became collectively known as Rosie's.
Yeah.
Or let's go to Rosie's tonight, because they loved going and seeing her as much as they would love going and having a drink. And she actually says, as much as she cites her grandmother, Alan Berg, the women's group, as real catalysts for her stand-up career, she actually says the first man that she abused in this bar, he laughed. She said if he never laughed, this whole thing might never have happened, because I probably would have been fired.
Yeah, that's right. That one laugh.
So she gives him a mention in the book as well.
Don't call me honey, you fucking pig, is what got her career started.
And then they actually said to her, it's better coming here than going to the Comedy Works.
Yeah, they said the comedy store only does like half an hour comedy, whereas you do 6 hours, 7 hours straight. She's like...
But she had no... She said, what's the Comedy Works? They had to tell her.
Yeah.
And then she went down there to find out what that was all about and actually thinking, oh, could I turn this into an act? Turns out she could.
And actually, in fact, when she first thought, maybe I could be a comedian, her first thought was, I could earn millions. That's really weird. Because my first thought would be, that could be a really good hobby. She thought I could earn millions. So she had the total confidence in her head before she even knew what it was she was doing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Bet most of those comedians never thought that.
No, why would you?
You wouldn't, would you?
No. Then a seminar for comedians came to Denver, and one of the people that came was Diane Ford, who was a successful female comedian. And Roseanne kind of bent her ear for a few minutes. And Diane gave her some advice. She said, tape your act and keep working on it. And the thing that Roseanne didn't realise is that you should be doing the same bit again and again and again in front of an audience to hone it. She was getting up and doing new material every night because she didn't think she could do the same thing again. What's weird, when I was coming here today, Dawn French was being interviewed on the radio. She said that when her and Jennifer Saunders started doing the comic strip, the live shows, she says she feels stupid admitting this. She said at the beginning she didn't realise that the audience was different people every night. Her and Jennifer Saunders did different sketches every single night. And the boys had to say to them, why are you doing different sketches? And they're like, well, they're like, no, it's different people. Do the same sketch every night until they get better. And she said they only got good when they were honing their act.
Yeah, exactly.
And now Roseanne is being told by this other comedian to tape her act, do it again and again and again. And then Roseanne says, this is when I started to become good.
And then at the end of the night, you listen back and you hear where the laughs are. And you think, if I try that bit differently, you might get a laugh there, you might get a laugh.
The inflection of the voice.
You try going up or going down. And if you get a different laugh, it's a craft.
And she also said to her, because your material is quite angry, you have to really work on being likeable yourself. And she also said, you're too fat. She said, lose some weight.
Yeah. So in the middle of all that advice, you're like, well, did you take any of it? Because you didn't, it wasn't all good. It wasn't all good advice. No.
Oh, it would have been all good for the comedian like Diane Ford was, maybe.
Yeah, but she definitely didn't have to lose weight. She found a niche.
Yeah, she
is a one-off person.
So she's at the comedy shop, and it's a boys' club, essentially. They don't give her the main slots. They keep her on a Monday night. And then eventually people do say to the manager, no, Roseanne is good. You need to put her on one of the main nights. So they do. They upgrade her, but she just bombs. So she gets relegated back to Monday nights again.
She partly said because all the other comedians were so misogynist. A feminist act cannot follow a misogynist act because everyone's all like wired up to hate women.
So what happens is then she goes back to the bookshop. They have a talent night and she goes, and of course she absolutely slays
because they're on her side.
Yeah, it's some material. That really gives her confidence. And then the women's group in the next town, they say, you need to come over to this women's group. And then she gets some gigs in jazz bars. Yeah. She goes on and they love her because she says that she has the jazz of words. That's her being abstract again, isn't it?
But it's true, she does.
Yeah, and then she does coffee houses where the punks hang out. And if she does something like Anti-Jackie O, they all absolutely love her. So she's having really good gigs. Every time she goes back to the comedy shop, she's absolutely bombing. Yeah. But in these other areas, she's doing really, really well. But anyway, it doesn't hurt to have bad gigs, let's face it, because you're just tightening your act the whole time. But she's learning stuff like her material is anti-male, but she had to learn to do it in a way where she doesn't alienate men.
Exactly.
Then she also found out if women come with their husbands and their boyfriends, they only laugh if the men are laughing. So it's not like she can appeal to the women industry. She has to win the men over. Yes. Which she does.
She does. I have watched quite a few of her early stand-up on various different things, on different shows, David Letterman, whatever. And it's the same act.
Yeah, it's good though, isn't it?
It's good though. It's really good. And you realise it's not her. It's a character. She's doing it all through this character, and that's what makes it work.
She said that when her and Geraldine, her sister's with her a lot, right, travelling around, and she'll sit in the front row of her gigs and stuff. Yeah. She said they were out one night. And with Bill as well, actually. Her husband is kind of involved. Yeah. They kind of just one day just hit upon this thing. Instead of going on stage and being Roseanne, like this feminist anti-man thing. Just go on and be a housewife.
Yeah.
She said actually Bill made her a microphone stand made out of a broom.
Yeah.
So she goes on as a housewife. And then as they're talking, she says, oh my God, domestic goddess. I'm not a housewife. I'm a domestic goddess. That's the first thing she says when she's like, oh, hi, everyone. I was let out of the house tonight. I'm a housewife. No, I'm a domestic goddess.
And she says it in the picture of being a total working class, all-American, average woman. And she's saying she's a domestic goddess. And people are falling about laughing.
And she's giving people a way in now. People can relate to her. Most people have got a housewife at home, but they don't have a big, shouty Roseanne feminist at home. But a housewife they can relate to. She's beginning to get them and win them over.
And it is really funny. But she's sneaking in her message.
Definitely. So her act is coming strong. People are responding really well. She's getting better slots. Then she gets headline gigs. So she gets like $500 in a week, right? Which is more money than she's ever earned in her life in a week. Amazing. But then she can also bomb as well. And I love this. She played this big gig where she absolutely tanked.
It's university students.
And there's 300 people there. When the gig was over, she went and stood by the door, and she said she looked every single one of them in the eye as they were walking out. And she said some of the men were like, oh, you were shit. And she would be like, oh, fuck you. But she'd look every single one in the eye. And she said the women could not look her in the eye. And she said, you're a cowardly bitch. Fuck you. And she waited until they'd all left. And then she said the next time she got on stage, she said, nothing is ever going to go that badly again. I can do whatever I want. I think that's amazing.
It's hardcore, isn't it?
Yeah, she is hardcore though, isn't she?
Yes, she is. She really is. This is what I mean. I didn't get her. Couldn't get it. And I was worried about all the chaos. And I was worrying. By the end of the book, I'm like, I get you now. And then I watched her act. And I was like, oh, you're really clever. It's really good. And it is capturing America at a time and a place and a certain person that has never been represented before. Their whole point of view, any of it. Because, she has this fantasy about Woody Allen. She gives over about 5 pages or more for this, doesn't she?
Yeah.
And you think it's this sexual fantasy and she's got a crush on him, but it isn't. Buried in that, you're thinking, does she actually even like him? Because she says, and in this fantasy, I sit down with him and I say, wouldn't it be great if in the movie that I'm starring in, you actually show women how they really think? And maybe you could also have a black woman in it. And you're like, this is actually, you're slating him in disguise. Wow. It's genius.
And then at the end of the dream, she goes off with Mel Gibson.
Yeah.
So there isn't any meat left on his bones. Then the Denver laugh-off happens, which is, I guess, a yearly thing, like a competition for stand-ups. Roseanne is the only female comedian taking part with 15 men. And she's like, I don't stand a chance. But luckily, when they draw positions, they all have to pick out of a hat. She gets the last slot, which is kind of like anything, Eurovision Song Contest, anything. If you go last, then you're in with a good chance anyway. But she said it was almost like kismet that the 15 blokes that went before her all had anti-women material. So that when she came on at the end and said, oh, well, the trouble with men, everybody, it was almost like they had set up for her to win. So everything she said, the audience had literally just witnessed it minutes before with all these other men. Anyway, it was a landslide. She won. So her name is known now. She brought the house down, being the only woman on a 15-man bill, wiped the floor with them all. She then is talking to the other comics, and I think one of the managers says to her, Roseanne, you can't do this in Denver. She goes, you need to go to LA, and, big things may happen.
She left her husband and 3 kids, of course, at that point, to go there on her own and sleep on people's sofas. I totally think that's brilliant.
I think she should. If she's got it in her head that she's going to make millions.
Oh, yeah.
And she's a feminist housewife.
No, she had to go.
So she had to go.
Yeah.
So she goes to LA to do a few gigs. And then, the woman, she's called Mitzi something. But anyway, she's a big mover and shaker in the world of LA comedy. And I think she manages or owns a comedy store. Anyway, Roseanne does 5 minutes in this little room. It's through a contact that she knows Mitzi, and she sees her and she says, please come and watch my 5 minutes. Mitzi Shaw, there we are.
The mother of the comedy store.
Right, there we go. So Roseanne says to her, please come and watch my 5 minutes. Roseanne does her 5 minutes. It goes very well. Mitzi Shaw goes up to Roseanne and she says, go and do 20 minutes in the main room now. Mitzi Shaw, mother of the LA comedy scene, has never told anybody to do that before. And then Roseanne goes and does her 20 minutes in the main room, is an absolute hit. And Mitzi Shaw says to her, you're going to change things for women in comedy.
Yeah, you're going to break down the doors.
Now, I kind of took a bit of issue with this because there have been other really good female comedians before Roseanne Barr.
Yeah, but she knew that was the one that would break down the doors.
That would cross over, like a proper mainstream crossover woman.
Like an Alan Partridge or something.
Yeah, we've had Lucille Ball. I guess she didn't come out of stand-up. Maybe that's what they meant.
There's always been some women, but in that particular point in the 80s, obviously, there was a bit of a lull on women.
Yeah. And then, so Mitzi puts her in this show, which is just called Funny, which is about showcasing female talent. And on one of the rehearsals in front of a live audience, this guy comes up to her and he's the talent booker for The Tonight Show.
Yep.
And then within like 2 days, she's on The Tonight Show, which is freely available to watch on YouTube.
Yeah, I did watch that.
Does that routine. And then that is the massive kick-off of her career. Yeah. And she said the good thing about The Tonight Show is she went from doing the Denver clubs right to concert tours. She said if she'd not had The Tonight Show, she'd have had to do it much slower, which meant she would have gone from a Denver club tour to a national club tour. And she said the audience would never have let a woman grow in that way.
Right.
So the fact she got The Tonight Show meant she could leapfrog right over and get a concert tour and pave the way for many other women.
Yeah.
So it's a real combination of that very strong personality, great material, but also putting yourself out there, but I guess also being in the right place at the right time as well. And presumably there are other women as well as Roseanne Barr trying to make it.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, but she's just the one
and at that point
for.
in the 80s,
But she was very, very good.
She's very, very good. I totally get it. And when she put the Roseanne show together, she picked the people, you know, she had a lot to do with the casting and really put it together. And I don't think she wrote it, but she really honed it and put the storyline.
You know what happened? The guy that wrote The Cosby Show, which was the biggest thing on TV. Now, this isn't in this book, obviously.
No, the book stops there, by the way. We're now just talking.
Yeah. The guy that wrote The Cosby Show was brought on to oversee the writing on Roseanne, the sitcom. And I don't know, about 9-10 episodes in, she began to not like what he was writing or overseeing writing. I think America's sitcoms are written by lots of people around a table. And she objected to it so strongly that she said, if you don't sack him, I'm not doing any more. That writer at that time was probably the most powerful writer in American comedy. He was writing The Cosby Show.
But she had to look after her brand, she got sunk. Now, along the way, by the way, her politics, she says she's very left-wing. She said Reagan had got in and we needed more voices from the left. She really slags off conservatives, slags off this whole American flag-waving type of person. So that's why you are disappointed as an ex-fan.
Me? No, I'm not an ex-fan.
You're still a fan.
I am still a fan of Roseanne.
You're still a fan. You're just very upset that she swung completely the other way from this character.
I think that the political landscape has shifted in itself, so I don't think that necessarily demonstrates a complete 180 in a particular person.
Yeah.
I think, like, for example, in England, the Labour Party is not the Labour Party anymore. In the last 30 years, things seriously shift.
True. But Reagan would probably look quite left-wing compared to Trump, for example.
Oh, yeah.
And yet now she's a Trump supporter, and then she was anti-Reagan.
I know, but then you have to look at her being a Trump supporter by looking at what the other choices are, i.e. Biden.
But plus a Trump supporter, feminist.
No, listen.
That's the sort of thing that always confuses me.
I'm confused by this whole thing, and I'm so confused by Roseanne Barr.
Misogynist, you know.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
The thing that really annoyed me yesterday, because I was all ready to come here and fight for Roseanne as a fan, even though I don't agree with everything she says and does, and I don't think like one tweet can or should define anyone.
Yeah.
But I think we live in an age where you can say one thing wrong and you are immediately cancelled and you're made out to be this terrible pariah that everybody should shun. The danger of that is if you do that to someone like Roseanne and all of a sudden the left shut down on you and exclude you, you've actually only got one place to go, which is over to the right.
Do you think that's what happened?
I think she's somewhere in the middle. I don't think she's a perfect person by any shot. I don't. But I think she had a career to salvage. I think afterwards, when she's saying, oh my God, was I cancelled for this tweet? And she tried to explain herself. The left just don't listen because she's cancelled now. There's no hope of even explaining what she meant
I did read
or
about
even
that
apologising.
I did see her point of view. But she shouldn't have said it.
No, she shouldn't have said it.
She hadn't really made a mistake. What did she say yesterday that upset you so much?
Oh, God damn it. Now, I think this is where she's gone down the rabbit hole, and 5 years later, she has her own podcast now where she talks to a lot of right-wing political pundits and stuff. And, just because of, where I come from and my history, I never write people off because they have differing political views to myself. If I did, I wouldn't have any friends
or
left.
family.
Yeah. So it's difficult at times, but I've had to, as a grown-up, separate that from the person inside.
Yes.
I can still get on with somebody. Just because somebody votes for Trump or Boris Johnson, it doesn't mean I cannot like them, doesn't mean I can't hang out with them, it doesn't mean we haven't got other things in common, it doesn't mean that they can't make me laugh, it doesn't mean I can't love them. Do you know what I mean? I'm a grown-up. This is how I don't exclude people on what they think. So I've had this feeling about Roseanne. It's like I know enough about her and I admire enough about her that I'm not going to write her off or cancel her myself. It doesn't mean I agree with everything she say. I don't agree with lots of things that other people I admire say. But I saw recently that she put a video on social media mocking the woman who had accused Donald Trump of raping her in a dressing room in a department store. And there was a video of Roseanne saying, oh no, last time I was in this department store, Joe Biden raped me. And it's just and when it's like, Roseanne, what are you
You've turned
doing?
your act and your actual reason of living on its head.
She's, you know what, I don't care about Joe Biden. I don't care about Donald Trump. Roseanne Barr should not be ridiculing a woman who says she's been raped. And I don't think the Roseanne in this book would have done that.
Absolutely wouldn't.
And I think that's the trouble now, because we cancelled her and she only had one way to go to continue making a living. She's now swung over to the right. And she's actually we know that bit where she stood and she eyeballed all of the audience on the way out and said, fuck you, fuck you. That she felt like there was nothing she couldn't do on stage anymore. She'd done the hardest thing. I think something similar has happened here. Whereas, she'd done something innocuous. Nobody believed her apology. She lost her sitcom. She lost every stream of revenue. She lost all of her co-stars. Yeah, she might have just thought, well, fuck it. Why shouldn't I say stuff like that now?
It's what you'd think she believes.
Yeah, I know. Look, I only found this out yesterday. I'm having trouble coming
That's difficult. It's difficult.
Yeah.
Because it's not funny either. So
no, it's
that's
not funny.
Comedy.
Yeah, it's not funny.
So how do you justify it? Right, we're just going to
you say it's not funny, but actually all of her right-wing audience now will think it's hilarious.
Oh, God.
And they did, so maybe her whole thing has shifted.
She's flipped.
The whole thing is complicated. It doesn't mean that I can't go back and still love her old comedy in the old because she was undoubtedly fantastic.
Yes. And actually, this book stopped in 1989, so we should.
Oh, right, we're just talking about her now.
Stop in 1989.
Well, she's brilliant.
Well, she's just starting out. She's absolutely amazing.
Do you know? But can I just say, as an addendum to that, I still really like her.
Yeah.
I do, despite she said a couple of appalling things. But also saying that I don't listen to her podcast every day. I don't do social media anymore. So I don't know what she is still saying on a daily basis. Maybe if I looked at maybe I'd hate everything she says now.
Let's leave her in 1989. Right. Let's leave it there.
Yeah. Oh, she's great.
She's great.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Thrift Shop Biography. We love making this podcast and we're absolutely thrilled that so many of you are already listening. You could really help us out by leaving us a review somewhere, wherever you listen to this podcast. And if you could share us, tell your friends about us, or drop some links on social media. We have a Facebook page called Thrift Shop Biography, so make sure you come over there to hear about the episodes first and what else we're up to. Okay, see you next week. And if you're new here, there are loads more episodes now to go and listen in the back catalogue, so make sure you go and enjoy them. Okay, thank you very much.